Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Women in Mobility. With me today is Harshbeena Zaveri, the Vice Chairman and Managing Director of NRB Bearings. Harshbeena, welcome and thank you for giving me time. So, getting on with the whole aspect of women in mobility, the series that we focus on, what is your take on the whole aspect of gender diversity? What does it really mean to you?
So, I do believe that it's an extremely important issue. I think that not including 50% of your population in every single arena that you can, and I won't list, from government to literally schools, teaching, corporate world, every single aspect, performing arts. I think the fact that writers, we know that women's history is just sort of a complete silent, it's an unknown world, right? What women did and how they lived in different eras. Not because women didn't express themselves, but because their expressions are not shared. So, of course, women being everywhere is critically important, but it's not just about women. I think inclusivity is about giving everyone a fair shot at whatever they want to do and whatever they want to express, wherever they want to be. And personally, I am a deep believer in inclusivity of every sort. And women are one aspect of that.
There's one aspect which you did tell me earlier, which was about equality and fairness and why that is so important to you. And I would really appreciate it if you could elaborate on that.
So, equality and fairness is a very complex thought to actually implement. Let me put it that way. The concept is not that you treat everyone the same. The concept is taking into account where the person has come from, what kind of opportunities they had, and how not level the playing field was for them. Okay. And really making sure that you create a level playing field. So whether it's through training, whether it's through sensitization, I would actually use a flip opposite to explain from what you expect, to explain what I mean. Men in India have been so sensitized or trained in terms of their automatic pilot behavior to not be sensitive or empathetic to certain situations. Or you could come from a very privileged background where you have not really truly thought of how the other half lives. So what do we do to make sure that we create a level playing field? That's what fairness is all about. So meritocracy is not about making everyone sit for the same exam. It's actually making good the difference before you make them sit for that exam. Wow. Does that answer your question?
It does.
In terms of my philosophy on this?
Yes, it does. And it also in turn prompts me to ask you a couple of more questions. When you started, for instance, on the shop floor, and today you're the Vice Chairman and the Managing Director, was the going as difficult for you when you went through this entire process?
So there are two different aspects of this. I joined the company not to run it. Okay. I joined the company to know more about the company. My father wanted me to be at least in a position to guide the future of the company as his successor. Right. But I didn't actually think that I would want to spend my life working for it. So I came in very much as an outsider that wanted to learn as much as possible about the company. And being a social anthropologist and urban planning major, for me, it was all about understanding the culture, the people, and whether the culture and the people are aligned to the goal of the organization.
Right.
And how can I contribute in whatever I would say format that I'm contributing to take the company to a higher level.
Right.
Initially, it was to take it to the higher level that was set by my father. Over the years, as things evolved, I think whatever I found interesting was not necessarily what other people thought mattered. For example, IR was very important in a manufacturing automotive company. To me, it was actually HR that mattered, because people are people are people, and I don't think we have to have a different perspective when you're talking about an operator or when you're talking about CXOs. Now, my father came from a very socialist background. He believed very deeply in people and in the ideology that everyone is truly the same.
Right.
And I think that is very unusual for India. So
Yes.
I am more comfortable to this day with real people.
Right.
I'm not necessarily as comfortable with people who come from a very privileged background, and I'm a people watcher. I think that the sheer numbers of the people who belong to a certain economic class or caste, or whether it's gender, I really link this up to who does the world belong to.
Wow.
So the only example I can give you to explain my thought process on this is when I was studying the urban changes that were taking place in Bombay,
Right.
I discovered quantitatively, of course we know so much of Bombay slum, but that 70 to 80% of our population live in slums. This is when I was doing my urban planning degree. Whose city is in any way?
Yes.
That was my first thought,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
Does that
It does. But
answer your question a
it-
little bit? So whose company is this anyway?
Right.
This company belongs to my operators as much as it belongs to those who sit in their corner offices.
Right.
And that is something that you have to completely reinforce again and again and again, because of, again, the way people have been brought up to believe,
Yes.
especially in our country, that he who is more wealthy, who is higher caste, who is more privileged, is more important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a big reason why people like to work for our company, because really, truly, we do treat them differently.
It's amazing, but you know, it's so impressive. But when you went through this process of transformation, did you face your share of challenges? Because you're also talking about a mindset in place, and here you are embarking on an absolute transformation, even of the way people thought, the levels of empowerment.
Not really, because my father believed deeply in these values. I imbibed them from him. Interestingly, our company was co-promoted by a French company and by our family, 70-30 initially, and a Frenchman came and lived here, out of which he lived in my home for the first part of it, and he lived here for many, many years and helped us recruit every single person. So for example, our assembly had only women from day one.
Wow.
In Bombay. It didn't necessarily happen when it got moved to Aurangabad and when we grew in different regions of the country. And the transformation that I had to constantly work on, and I constantly work on even today, is to take us back to the ideals we were set up on.
Wow.
So it's not that we were this kind of company and I came in and changed it. I think my father set it up that way, and then as it expanded and grew, a lot of other people who didn't have the same beliefs got control and power.
Wow.
So I took it back again and again, and I continue to have to take it back to what our core values are and our core behaviors are. Because what is culture? Culture is just the collective behavior of a group of people.
Right.
And if the collective behavior is X, that's your culture. If it's Y, that's your culture.
Right.
So unless there are adequate people who behave in a certain way and who show respect for those values,
Right.
who walk the talk from top to bottom. I mean, when I go to the plants, every single time I sit down on the shop floor or the garden with my operators, every single time. When we have family day, our operators' families are there. their parents are there and their children are there and their spouses are there. Many times people bring their engaged partners or boyfriends or girlfriends, because they're so much part of
Wow.
our company, is so much part of their life.
Wow.
So we, in many ways, try to fulfill the aspirations of the young people to be able to think of what do I want to be? What do I want to achieve? What do I care about? And the company gives them that opportunity that many times their families and surely many, many other companies didn't.
Wow. This is incredible. If I may, I'm reminded of a conversation that the two of us had recently where you spoke about Japan, Germany cultures, and yet you reiterated that a so-called unique culture, an NRB or an Indian culture was as important, if I remember right.
Definitely. I think each culture has its strength and its, I would say, concern areas. I wouldn't necessarily say weaknesses. India is amazing because it's so multicultural that you can create any kind of cultural mix that you want, just from different regions and from different areas. And I won't talk about what I think are the strengths of maybe Maharashtrian culture or of Bengali culture, because when you say one or two sentences, it's very easy for it to turn into some kind of stereotypical, I would say, expression.
Right.
But I would surely say that the young want to feel their way about, and the young want to experiment, and the young tend to be more open-minded, and the older generation, and that is reflected in companies, the older companies are biased towards the status quo and maintaining the status quo. So this is all about giving those who are not part of the status quo.
Right.
I would not say equal opportunity, but a little more than equal opportunity, because otherwise, how will you keep your culture relevant?
Yes.
So it's similar to the kind of challenges that you face in the business world. So if you're transitioning from the traditional motor car, which frankly hasn't changed since Henry Ford's time, if you open the bonnet, till now, and companies have been spending billions of dollars over the years on R&D, right? International companies spend 4% of their turnover or something on R&D. And what was that spent on? Okay, I sit and wonder, because the first real change comes by and you're like, oh, we have to acquire a company and throw away everything that we have.
Oh, yes.
Makes no sense to me. Any kind of investment, whether it's in people, whether it's in R&D, whether it's in manufacturing capabilities, whether it's in technologies, it needs to be to stay relevant.
Yes.
And to stay relevant, it has to be disruptive. And I think that is really the edge that our company has. We hire people who have courage. We hire people who have an opinion. We hire people who are open-minded and willing to change that opinion. We hire people who want to build and build a future that they're not 100% sure what it is, where it's going to take them. So they are comfortable with improvisation, which is really the name of the game, right? But at the same time, you want to improvise everything except the core values.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. It really does. And whilst on that, are you pleased with the pace of progress in this transition? You're still, the way things are happening. You spoke about the youngsters also, in a manner of speaking. So there is a transition happening. Are you pleased with the way this transition is also happening?
So I think that there is also a certain mindset that I have. And my mindset is that to an extent, you can't really change people because they have years and years and years of acculturation and to have been trained into a certain kind of thought process, and to change that is a very long, drawn, slow process. It is much simpler to change the processes, and I'll give you a very good example. So you have a person from the north which generally tends to be less disciplined, who is getting into an airplane from Delhi to Bombay first. So he gets into an airplane from Delhi to Bombay. People are not in line. They're screaming, shouting, pushing each other, whatever it might be. वो रास्ते में भी गाड़ी कैसे वैसे उनकी चल रही है, not following the rules because they're running late. The minute they get into the plane and then they land in Bombay, you see a slight difference in their behavior. यहाँ वहाँ देखते हैं सब लोग लाइन में खड़े हैं, वो भी लाइन में खड़े हो जाते हैं. The way they talk to the customs officer, to the, I wouldn't say customs officer because right now we're still within India.
Right.
In my story.
Right.
Then they switch aircraft and then they get into a, let's say, flight from Bombay to Dubai on Emirates. When they land in Dubai, their behavior is completely different.
Yes.
It reaches a slightly higher level. Then they land, but they still have a little sense of pride. I'm an Indian and I should be treated a certain way. And then they land in a white country and then they're looking at all these white people like they are gods because of the way they've been brought. But what I'm trying to tell you is culture and how you behave in different scenarios, especially for Indians, because they come from such a complex culture, is fluid.
Yes.
So if they can walk through this door and feel more comfortable in their own skin, and we have gone in our hiring process to put a lot of effort to select people whose own skin that they're comfortable in
I see.
works for what we're trying to build and create and what we believe in. I think that one thing about Indians, so there are two aspects. Going back to your earlier question, and I'm linking up.
Right.
What is wonderful about India is our concept and our understanding of how the rest of the world and foreigners are to be respected.
Yes.
So, Atiti Devo Bhava is very, very rare. Étranger, whatever word you use for stranger in other cultures and other languages is negative, pejorative.
Right.
Here, it's exemplified by the notion that somebody who suddenly come into your group might be God in disguise, right? So that's such a smart way of making sure that you treat outsiders with respect and look up to them and don't judge them and are on your best behavior. Now, that is why hospitality industry is amazing here.
Yes.
Manufacturing is not in our DNA because, we're a caste system. So the dirty work gets done by somebody else. Countries where everyone does their own dirty work and does not create dirty work. Like when I chop vegetables, I put the kachra in a small little bin.
Correct.
This is not normal for India. There's nothing lying around. You open my cupboard, they're completely. So 5S is a part of my DNA.
Right.
Because my father was a socialist and didn't believe that anyone should do any of his dirty work from beginning to end. I do everything, whether it's clean my bathroom or that I will bring the cup of coffee for you, and that is part of our culture. If you don't want to do the dirty work, this is not the right place for you because work is work is work.
Yes.
There's nothing like dirty work, right? Now, having said that, I feel that what is very important is to give respect to everything and everyone, but also be realistic about your culture. So we have to constantly put a lot of effort to keep our manufacturing culture equal to Japan or Germany. On the other hand, how you treat customers comes naturally to us. So what did I say? I said, I want to build a company where OEMs globally and giving them what they need from design to delivery, solving their problem, taking care of their pain areas, taking them to the next level, whether it was ICE or whether it was the 4-stroke engine or BS6 or BS7 or e-mobility, we need to adapt all our processes, not our thinking. Your thinking is irrelevant unless your behavior and processes change, right?
Absolutely.
That is how the company has been built, and hospitality is inherent in our culture. So you also want to leverage what is inherent and the strength of your culture. Does that make sense? So you have to struggle again, what's your weakness, and constantly stay on top of it. But you have to, at the same time, leverage your strength. And therefore, the transition to e-mobility for us is really not that difficult because we don't do these big bang investments where we have all this capacity, you don't know what to do with it. We don't invest in the status quo. We just stay relevant
Wow.
as change happens.
Wow.
So it's a lot easier for us.
Right.
It's
No,
a lot
that-
natural to us.
Right. No, beautifully put, and thoroughly what I would call ample food for thought. But whilst on the subject, I come back to women very, very briefly. In your view, do you believe that women have specific skills and strengths that they bring to the table? And more specifically, in NRB, for instance, is that something you'd like to perhaps recount?
So there are 2 points. I think your question, if I flip it over, is what kind of difference can women make to the corporate
Yes.
world, and what kind of difference can women make to the world?
Right.
I think that women are very comfortable wearing multiple hats. I am as comfortable talking about my children as I am talking about my parents, as I am talking about my CXO or my secretary or my operators, and I am the same person, but I'm also able to differentiate performance from empathy. So women are comfortable wearing multiple hats. Women are essentially empathetic, and I won't get into whether it's nature or nurture, but at the end of the day, they're essentially more empathetic. They notice more things. They are more detailed oriented when it comes to people. They have a higher level of emotional IQ. And what most companies are now saying are leadership traits, right? Taking people's opinions into account, making them feel cared for, making them feel motivated, because competency is one thing, motivation is another. Competency is something that you carry, it's a skill set. Motivation is whether you want to use the skill set to take the job, the company, your task to the next level, or to block it. Your motivation could be negative or positive,
Yeah.
right? And therefore, I think that women surely bring something very special to the table. I also think that you need a certain critical mass to make the change happen. And I'm not necessarily a deep believer in hiring women for the sake of hiring women, because I actually am not so comfortable hiring, for example, women operators who come from families where they have first to finish everything at home, wake up at 3 a.m. and finish all the housework, and then show up at 8 a.m. at work, and then take their whole paychecks and hand it over to, whether it's in a patriarchal society, the mother-in-law or the father-in-law is irrelevant, because patriarchy is driven by women's behavior. That's
Yes.
how men control women, through
Yes.
the other women.
Yes.
So what matters to me is women in leadership positions, women with power, women with leadership, whether it's caste, class, gender, creed, or even, I would say, gender diversity in terms of all the other genders, transgender, people who are differently sexually oriented. It's how many of them are in senior positions that changes organizations and changes the world. So my focus has always been on having as many women come into powerful positions or be in powerful positions, because they can change the thinking of the men. Because unless we change the thinking of the men, we won't get anywhere. I refuse to speak at Women's Day events where there are only women. Unless half the audience is men,
Yes.
what kind of impact am I going to have?
Yeah.
I work a lot more on men's thinking, than women. Because women in India tend to have a victimization mindset because they've been brought up with it. So it's as important to address the men and not exclude them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and to me it's a bit of a learning, because I assume that patriarchy continues because of the general conditioning men and women go through. But what you said to me is extremely revealing. It's very interesting. Thank you
So
for
women
that.
definitely bring empathy to the table.
They do.
Women definitely bring a lot more watching. And listening is one thing, but actually watching, holistically seeing where people are comfortable, uncomfortable, how you can keep them motivated, and more importantly, women are outsiders, so they have a lot more courage. And outsiders and outsiders and outsider, okay? They don't belong to the boys' club, they're not so, you know, on boards, you have differences of opinion, and then people go for a drink, and then they come back, and then they just vote. That's a very male thing, you know. And it's how it works, right? But women don't belong to that club, so they will always go issue by issue and specifically support or not support. Of course, I'm making some generalities. All women are not like that, but most of them are. And that is what they bring to the table. And they tend to be very realistic. The one big difference you saw in COVID, the male leaders, they were in some la-la land where they thought, oh, this is a 2-day thing, 3-day thing. The women, it was a reality check. People are dying, this is happening. Who knows how long it will last? So let's really address this. And the same women were able to pivot and switch over when they needed to open their nations also. Whereas you can see some of the male leaders are still stuck at the old notions, and then they open too soon with no preparation. So women tend to prepare better. They have to prepare better because they are judged on performance and not on potential. Men are judged on potential, women are judged on performance. The performance has to be so hardcore, so much better before they are given a chance. But interestingly, in difficult situations and crisis situations, people give women a chance only because there's very little to lose.
Right.
So the biggest
Yes.
issue that we have to surmount in ensuring more women come into leadership positions is to give them much more experience in strategy.
Right.
So there's a tendency if women are good at something to just keep them and make them do that.
Right.
Not to give them exposure and not to make them into leaders.
Right. Thanks.
And statistics proves all this. And I don't want to get into the stats.
Absolutely.
And you know very well that having a pipeline of women means nothing. So the companies that have the most women have zero in the senior positions very often. Look at the IT world, look at electronics, look at universities. The teachers are women, but not the heads.
You're right.
Right? Not the heads of the department, not the heads of the university.
Right.
Right?
You're right.
It's not a numbers game. It's totally different.
Right.
Mentoring and networking and role modeling.
Right.
Those are the 3 things that make a difference, not just to women, but to any community or group of people who are not adequately represented.
Right.
That's the trilogy.
Right. Here's my last question before, and it's been wonderful. Shifting gears a bit, if I may. NRB. Where would you like to see, let's say, the NRB of tomorrow? Mobility is going in for massive disruption. There are a whole lot of challenges. You did tell me the transition has been smooth, but perhaps you can dwell a little more on that.
Yeah, so there are 2 things. I think the India story is very much intact, and that India, while it will transition to e-mobility, it will go through it in its own pace and with its own pattern. Therefore, I feel that we need to have an India-specific focus, and we need to have a global e-mobility focus. So we're increasingly looking at separating these 2 out, because the pace at which certain nations are adopting electric mobility is extremely accelerated. And there we need to develop certain technologies extremely fast and be very agile, because we are determined to be the #1 bearing and precision component supplier to global e-mobility, and particularly high-end e-mobility. So whether India really moves to the highest, most complex platforms in terms of whether it's electronic axles or e-axles, e-steering, there are also a lot of components and assemblies which go in, which are common globally but may not be common here, because our transition might go through its own phase, because we're such a large nation and we have such a big market. We don't need to necessarily mimic the rest of the world. Eventually, I think it'll all get to the same place. But transition and how long something takes is the most important for a business, right? In the transitions that India goes through in the mobility world, and we will surely emerge a front runner in global e-mobility in Europe and America.
Fabulous. Lovely talking to Harshbeena. A big, big thanks as always.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful
It's always a pleasure to meet you, Murli. I just so enjoy it, because the conversations are so completely different from what
Likewise.
happens elsewhere.
Thanks. It's wonderful chatting with you. I don't even need to say that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care.